When we think about nutrition, we need to revolve around two major categories. The first one is macronutrients, and the other one is micronutrients. Because when it comes to nutrition, it is broken up into two subcategories: the molecules that are macro and the molecules that are micro. They both play an important aspect in our daily intake of food because all the ingredients that you consume are broken up into subcategories of macromolecules and micromolecules, such as proteins, fats, and carbs that you're all quite familiar with hearing on a daily basis, but also the minerals and the vitamins that you don't need as much of, but are very important that we also need to tackle in this video. So when it comes to nutrition, what is it? Simply put, it's a science of how nutrients in food affect us. All right, or affect our health. Nutrients are obviously components in food that are very important for our growth and obviously ultimately survival. For survival and growth. Eating a balanced diet is vital for health and obviously our well-being. So once it's inside our body, the nutrients are broken down into simpler molecules used as building blocks, such as the proteins that when you eat them, they get broken up, they catabolize into the amino acids, or the complex sugars that you consume, they break up into its disaccharides and monosaccharides. So nutrients break down into building blocks, so these simpler molecules, okay, after consumption. So foods contain these nutrients. We need these nutrients to grow, build tissues, to produce energy. So to grow, build tissue, which is a conglomerate of when cells get together, cells of the same type, to produce energy. All right, or specifically useful energy. Now, you might have heard of the terms organic versus inorganic. And a lot of individuals think organic is the same as natural, when that's actually not the case. Organic just means it contains carbon. And I actually want to add in hydrogen as well, because all organic molecules have carbon and hydrogen. But something like water is just H2O. A lot of people might think it's organic. No, it's natural, but it's not organic because there is no carbon and hydrogen. There is a hydrogen, but it has an oxygen. There is no carbon, okay? It's not there, so it's definitely not organic. It would actually be categorized as inorganic, all right? So water is inorganic. All right, so I'll just say doesn't contain carbon and hydrogen. And maybe if you want to add here as well, for inorganic molecules, they tend to have some metals. So metals tend to get intertwined. Whereas in organic molecules, there are no metals, okay? Most of the time, the organic molecules, they're all non-metals. So on your periodic table, pretty much all the ones on the right side of the staircase of those metalloids, okay? All of those are non-metals. So I'll just put here as some examples for organic. They can be like the carbs that we just mentioned, the fats, right, that you know of, and the proteins. Whereas for the inorganic, it would be like water or even like minerals. By the way, vitamins are actually organic as well. Let me give you a few more examples. So vitamins. All right, what other examples for organic, and what other examples for inorganic? Let's take an example of an apple. All right, where do you think that would be? Do you think it's an organic or do you think it's inorganic? It would be organic. Why? Because apple is a living thing. It's a plant. And all living things must contain C's and H's, carbons and hydrogens. They have to. In fact, organic chemistry is also known as carbon chemistry. Okay? The building blocks of life chemistry. There's a whole section, there's a whole study solely dedicated to chemistry regarding the organics. All right, how about fire? Where do you think fire would be? Organic or inorganic? Definitely inorganic, because it doesn't contain carbon, it doesn't contain hydrogen. It's kind of like a plasma. It's like a different. It's kind of like a mix between. There's a gray area between like maybe like a gas or like a plasma. That's what fire is, but it definitely is not a living thing. It doesn't have C's and H's, so for sure, fire would be here. All right, how about aspirin or Tylenol? Where do you think that would be? Do you think it would be organic or do you think it would be inorganic? It's actually organic because it is only made of non-metals, okay? And hydrogen and carbon are also non-metals. Even though this is on the left side of the periodic table, it's the only one on the left side of the periodic table that is a non-metal, okay? It's on the left side of the periodic table on the far left just because of its valence, okay? It has one valence electron, and due to its reactive nature, it also belongs there, but it's still a non-metal. All right, so aspirin, okay, those aspirin tablets are organic. Okay, it doesn't have any metals intertwined with it, just purely non-metals. All right, how about air? What do you think that would be? Organic or inorganic? It would be inorganic. What does air consist of? It consists of, well, mostly nitrogen. Actually, I think 78% nitrogen or something like that, and like the other rest is like 20% is oxygen, and then the rest are like some helium, maybe some argon gas or whatever. Okay, but that makes up a very, very small percentage. It'll be inorganic. It's obviously non-living either. So air would be there. Or how about dirt or soil? Where do you think that would be? Organic or inorganic? Well, dirt or soil, this is actually kind of a trick question. It could be both, because you would think that maybe they're inorganic by nature, because they're not living things, right? C's and H's, but they could have some metals being intertwined in it if there's a runoff that leaches into the soil, but also dead material, worms, the decomposers, bacteria, rotting banana peels or apple cores, right? Those are living things that get dissolved into the soil. So it could have a little bit of both. So I'll just put here soil. Okay, it could be kind of both. We'll just do one more now. What about rocks? What would rocks be? A rock would be inorganic. It's not a living thing, doesn't have C's and H's. And a lot of rocks are made from the entanglement of oxides or sulfides, different cations attached to those, like iron oxides, for example, making up a lot of the Earth's crust. So it could have a lot of metals. Definitely not living, so for sure will be inorganic. So organic doesn't mean natural. Obviously, look at aspirin, right? When you make those aspirin tablets, do you think that's natural? Definitely not natural. It's medicine. It's not natural. It's man-made. But it is organic. So please don't get those confused. Organic and natural and inorganic as unnatural. It's not the same. All right, let's look at macronutrients. So macronutrients must be consumed continuously. Must be consumed continuously because they provide us with the energy. All right, micronutrients do not give us energy. So, like I said, the carbs, the fats, the proteins are used as sources of energy. But just please remember, I'll put this as a star, okay, water, so H2O, and nucleic acids, the ones that make up like your DNA, for example, deoxyribonucleic acid, they do not provide any energy to the living organism. Okay, but nucleic acids are macronutrients, just like carbs, fats, and proteins. Let's look at this one first. C, the carbs. They're the main energy source. And hopefully you remember from my glycolysis video, the link is in the description if you want to have a read on that, if you want to have a watch, how important glucose was because of its hexokinetic property, and also how readily available and how energy and how efficient it is to be consumed by different parts of the body. And it makes up a large component of our diet. For most people, around 50%. Remember, it always contains CHNO. Alright, so these are those elements on the periodic table: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Okay, so maybe I'll just change this real quick. Alright, so this will be carb, fat, protein. Alright, so carbs always contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And carbs can also contain dietary fiber. So things like bread, so here I'll just put some examples, some bread, whole wheat bread, right? You don't want it to be refined. Eat whole wheat, whole grain. Don't eat white bread. Corn is pretty much all fiber. It's pretty much made of insoluble fibers. That's why you can poop it out and it'll look exactly the same, right? Barley, wheat, etc. Right? Pasta, rice. Okay. Again, eat brown rice, not white rice. Don't get it refined. And there are 3 types of carbohydrates. Okay, so I'll just put types here. What are the 3 types? The first one is monosaccharides. Second one is disaccharides. And the third are polysaccharides. You can tell by these prefixes what they pretty much mean, all right? Mono just means one, so it just has one sugar. It's just, sorry, just one sugar. One sugar. Disaccharides, however, have 2 sugars, all right? So for example, sucrose or maltose or lactose. What are the 2 sugars that makes up each one of these guys? Sucrose is made of glucose and fructose. Maltose, however, is made of glucose and glucose. And lactose is made of glucose and galactose. So glucose will be a monosaccharide. Fructose is a monosaccharide. Lactose is a monosaccharide. But when you put them together, you get a disaccharide. You combine them into these respective molecules. And then polysaccharides could be things like starch. Okay, so multiple sugars combined together. All right, so things like starch, which is like made in plants, cellulose, also made in plants, but glycogen is made in animals. Okay, so made in animals, plants. All right, so plants contain their energy ready to do work via starch when broken apart. Cellulose is like the fiber of the plant, creating an extra barrier with the environment to help with its turbo pressure and rigidity. Glycogen in animals, we store our sugars as glycogen so that when you're about to do some heavy workout, the sugars get broken up from there, from that source, from that storage of energy to be used up immediately. So it's very efficient. If our glycogen stores are all saturated within our muscles, liver, etc., then those sugar will be stored as fat. All right, lipids or fats, okay? So they store large amounts of energy. So it's good to use fats as a storage of energy when you do long durations of exercise. Okay? But guess what? They also help absorb vitamins. Especially vitamins A, D, E, K. A, D, E, K. These are fat-soluble vitamins. They also insulate the body. Helps keep warmth. And protects organs. That's why belly fat, even though in this day and age, not a very attractive feature, however, structurally, it is very important and it's protected our ancestors because those vital organs, if they get punctured, can be very, very harmful. Can make you even susceptible to death. So having fat in that area protects them. What are some good examples of fats, oils, waxes? They're one category. Phospholipids are another. What are they for? Well, they make up like the cell membrane, for example. So the phospholipid bilayer made of phospholipids. And they can be hydrophobic or hydrophilic, right? So obviously the heads are hydrophilic, the tails are hydrophobic, which is why they're very important for our cells, because we need fats and an aqueous solution environment all the time, constantly running throughout our body, so it needs to be able to handle both. Dish soap, for example, have phospholipid components too. It can wash away and dissolve the water that's running from the tap onto the dish, but also can get rid of the grease from the fats that you've eaten on your plate. And steroids as well are also lipids. So things like estrogen, testosterone, those hormones, they're steroids. They're a lipid. All right, what are the types? Types of fat? Well, there's saturated. There's unsaturated, which is the good kind, right? Saturated is not, but unsaturated is. But I do want to go more into detail on a separate video regarding saturated and unsaturated and trans fats, for example, because it does require a little bit of chemistry. And I can prove why unsaturated is much healthier. And proteins. So proteins are made of long chains of amino acids. All right, AA is going to be amino acid. So there are 20 amino acids, okay? That organisms pretty much use to build proteins, all right? To build proteins. The human body can actually make 12. 12 can be made by body. However, 8 can't. All right, so it must be from diet, from our food. All right, and these are considered essential amino acids. They also compose of the cell membrane. Remember those receptors, those receptor proteins that are on the outside of our cell, allowing things to go in and out, can act as messengers, right? They provide structure. And they help make antibodies. Which helps signal other, like the leukocytes, the WBCs, specific cells, like the killer T cells, with a particular antigen to make sure that they can recognize the ones that are harmful and tackle them to ensure that you don't get sick. And they're all And proteins are great transport substances. So for example, hemoglobin, it's a protein, helps move around oxygen because 4 molecules of oxygen can bind onto that hemoglobin protein. And doing this is actually 70 times more efficient for oxygen to be carried around to every single part of your body where it's needed, as opposed to if you didn't have hemoglobin. Acts as enzymes. As I've said before, enzymes help speed up reactions by lowering the activation energy. So to speed up reactions, RxN, reaction. They also can store metal ions. This last one is easy to remember, obviously movement. Right, the muscles in our body helps us move, right? They anchor onto the bones to make sure the bones move. They contract and relax. So they're responsible for our movement. All right, last one for the macronutrients, the nucleic acids. They store and transmit hereditary information. All right, and there's 2 types of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. So deoxyribonucleic acid and RNA, ribonucleic acid. We'll get into the specifics of DNA and RNA a little bit later on in another video when we tackle the unit for replication, transcription, translation, etc. So I just want to make sure that I preface it that for the body to use macronutrients, which contain energy, they must be broken into monomers. Right, into its smaller parts. So carbohydrates, so like the big ones, like the polysaccharides, if they interact with water, they help split up into like monosaccharides. All right, so the polysaccharides plus water. So this would be like hydrolysis. Will become the monosaccharides. You have a lipid, for example, and if it also undergoes hydrolysis, breaks into its glycerol and fatty acid constituents. Protein, for example, if it undergoes hydrolysis, you guessed it, amino acids, right? And the last one, let's say a nucleic acid, if it undergoes hydrolysis, breaks up into its constituent nucleotides. All right, and this can happen in the other way, right? And if this happens in the other direction, this will just be dehydration, right? Because you're not adding water, okay, if it's like that, right? So on this side, okay, water is not going to be on this side. Water would be on that side, all right? So this area. So because water is being produced, okay, it's being released, it's being let go, also known as dehydration, right? Water is being released. So think about you being dehydrated. It's really being released from your body, from your pores of the skin, right? You're getting rid of it. You're being dehydrated. Okay, so if it's dehydration, it would be in the opposite direction. If you want to build bigger constituents. But if you're going to break them down into their monomers, right, it will be in this direction where you would have to have water as a reactant. Obviously, we need enzymes too here, but we're just not going to get into that much detail, okay? And you know what? While we're talking about water, let's just write some important notes, some small notes about it, because it's not a source of energy, not a source of energy. But it's needed by all cells. To dissolve substances. And it obviously makes up a large component of your blood as well. And your body is made up of, I think, 60% water, or maybe a little bit less. Of blood. But it's obviously the most abundant molecule. Most abundant in a cell. Most abundant in any cell. So what are some functions? Well, it flushes toxins, lubricates joints, forms mucus so that those can be released. So for example, especially when you're sick, the harmful organisms within the trachea, the cilia helps form the mucus, takes those so that you can spit them out, or even when you're breathing on a daily basis with pollutants in the air. Why do you cough? Well, the mucus forms to ensure that those harmful things do not go in. Now, regulates body temperature, and transports materials. Okay, and so obviously we lose water constantly as well. But when we sweat, when we breathe, when we pee, so we obviously have to be replenishing them daily throughout the day. All right, micronutrients. So let's look at vitamin first, and then we'll tackle the minerals. So our vitamin, it's an organic molecule. That the body requires. Okay, but we don't need too much, so we just need them in small amounts. What do they do? They regulate cell function. Reg cell function, okay? Regulate. Growth and development for our bodies. They're classified as either fat soluble or water soluble. So the fat soluble, like I've actually mentioned earlier, they're stored in fatty tissue. All right, and they're not easily eliminated from the body. So having too much of this in excess is not good. So taking high doses can actually lead to toxic effects. So like I said, ADEK, right? Vitamins ADEK. But then we have water-soluble ones. Cannot be stored. Not stored in body. So excess quantities are readily excreted into urine. So having lots of B vitamins and C vitamins is not very problematic because you'll just flush it out. So we've obtained most of our vitamins from our food, but vitamins A, D, K can be produced in our bodies. So let's look at vitamin A. It's great for vision. All right, increases vision. Helps with maintaining skin and bones. What about B vitamins? Metabolizes carbs. And helps to ensure growth and muscle tone. How about C vitamins? Similar to vitamin A, helps ensure the bones are healthy. but also your teeth and blood vessels. And for sure, you've also been told when you're sick to have a lot of vitamin C because it does boost the immune system. Vitamin D, I'm sure some of you might have also heard having ample amount of vitamin D with calcium. It's true because it helps absorb calcium. Again, helps form the bones. And we'll just do one more for good measure. Just go from A, B, C, D, E. Strengthens the blood cell membrane. Now that was vitamins. So now let's look at some minerals. What's the difference? Well, minerals are naturally occurring elements that the body uses. All right, naturally occurring. That the body uses to help carry out metabolic processes. So like building tissue or repairing tissue. So like I said a little bit earlier with vitamins, they do similar things, right? They do formation of bone, helps with muscle contraction, nerve impulse transmission, and maybe and transporting oxygen. So what do we need a lot of? Let's just get into the important stuff. Otherwise, it just might seem a little too boring. What are the most important minerals for a body? The element calcium, the element phosphorus, the element sodium, and iron. Now I'll just put a smaller star, not as important, or don't need as much of, fluorine, and zinc, and copper. Now it's easy to just Google these ones, where to find ample amounts in which types of food and what they're good for, but I'll just go through a few of these, maybe 3 or 4. So let's maybe look at calcium. So they help obviously form bone, and obviously muscles are anchored and attached to the bone, so we're going to also add contract muscle. But believe it or not, they help with blood clotting factors. Because clotting blood is not necessarily always a bad thing. When you get cut, you want to make sure that like platelets build to ensure that it stops bleeding. And nerve signaling. Iron, a very obvious one, is producing hemoglobin. The protein that carries the oxygen, remember? And then maybe like sodium. It balances body fluid. But we'll also see in a future video that potassium, sodium are also key when it comes to nerve impulse transmission and signaling, kind of like what calcium does too. So I want to add this here actually as well. So we'll get to that video a little bit later on with further depth. especially for you AP biology students. So nerve signaling. Now, if there's anything here that you want to know about that is maybe not listed here, maybe like magnesium, for example, right? If you have low levels of this, or you have certain foods, or you consume foods on a daily basis that do not necessarily have a lot of magnesium, like I just know on the top of my head what magnesium does, like produces protein, and supports enzymes. But hey, that's what Google's for. You can just do that yourself. And if you want to see what kind of foods that you're not having enough of, you can easily just go on Chronometer. Chronometer. All right, or other apps or sites where you can log in what kind of foods you eat, and you can see which levels are not necessarily close to 100% or too far away from 100% of your daily value that you need to consume more of. But these are just like the basic guidelines of a foundation to start off with. But obviously, if you're health conscious or you're a student athlete, it's important to make sure that all your levels, your vitamins and your minerals, are nearing that 100% daily value category. So if supplementation is what you want to do as well, by all means.